For 3 years, I'd been estranged from my son. I brought a small gift bag, hoping to mend things. But as my hand touched the gate, a neighbor stopped me, whispering, "You're about to step into a nest of vipers. What awaited me beyond that door?" Ring! Ring! The phone's chime cut through the familiar quiet of my suburban home. I sat in the velvet armchair Eleanor once loved most, holding a book whose spine was worn smooth. At 72, I'd learned to slow down amidst the busy silences, but my mind often drifted back to Eleanor, my late wife. The house, once warm and filled with laughter, now felt spacious and cold, especially for a man living alone like me. Slowly, I reached out and picked up the landline phone on the side table. "Hello? Dad, Edward? It's me, Andrew." My son's voice, Andrew, rang through the line. There was something overly enthusiastic, too eager yet tinged with a hurried, unnatural quality that made me frown slightly. "Dad, long time no see. Would you like to come over this weekend? We miss you so much." I paused. Miss you so much? After 3 years of estrangement, after countless simmering conflicts that were never fully resolved? I wavered. Part of me was wary, wondering about the true motive behind the sudden invitation. Andrew and Clara, my daughter-in-law, rarely initiated contact, let alone invited me to visit. But another, weaker part, ignited a faint spark of hope. I remembered Eleanor's words, her voice still echoing in my ears. "No matter what, Andrew is your son. Never abandon him, okay?" The yearning for a reunited family, though I knew it was difficult, still smoldered within me. I took a deep breath. "All right, Andrew, I'll come." After the call, I started packing. Not much, just a small bag with a few changes of clothes. I carefully placed Eleanor's old wool cardigan inside, the one she'd knitted for Andrew ages ago, a thick teal-colored sweater imbued with a mother's love and warmth. Then, a special box of herbal tea, Eleanor's favorite, the kind I used to brew for her whenever she felt tired. Finally, I placed our family photo frame on top. In the picture, Andrew was a little boy standing between Eleanor and me, all three of us smiling brightly. I wanted Andrew to remember those days when our family was whole, without distances or hidden agendas. 3 days later, my old Cadillac slowly rolled down the road, leaving the familiar suburbs behind, heading towards opulent Beverly Hills. Throughout the long drive, my emotions churned like waves. I was nervous about the meeting, unsure how Andrew and Clara would greet me. Hope was fragile, like a thin, elusive thread, but deep inside I also felt a vague unease. A hunch told me this trip wasn't just a simple family reunion. Finally, after 2 hours of driving, I arrived. I pulled up in front of Andrew's luxurious mansion. It was dazzling, overwhelmingly modern, with large glass panels and minimalist architecture. Its opulence made my old Cadillac look even more out of place, and so did I. Between my son and me, there wasn't just a geographical distance, but a chasm of wealth, of a life I no longer belonged to. I got out of the car and approached the gate. It was an intricately carved iron gate, tall and private. I reached out to press the doorbell, expecting Andrew to come out and greet me. Just then, a figure suddenly darted out from behind the lush laurel hedge. It was Mr. Thompson, a silver-haired neighbor I'd met in passing a few times. He was holding pruning shears, a lit cigarette dangling from his lips, his brown eyes scrutinizing me. Mr. Thompson didn't speak loudly. He leaned in close, lowering his voice just enough for me to hear. He placed a hand on my shoulder, a light but tense touch, then whispered, "Be careful. You're about to step into a nest of vipers." His words hit me like a splash of cold water, drenching all my fragile hope and peace. A nest of vipers? I was stunned, my throat dry. I tried to ask again, "What did you say? What do you mean?" But Thompson shook his head decisively, his eyes darting towards the mansion as if in fear. He offered no further explanation, quickly turning and almost fleeing behind the hedge. As Thompson turned away, something shiny fell out of his pants pocket, a metallic money clip gleaming. It caught on the fence mesh, popping out clearly. I caught a glimpse of a debossed logo on the metal surface. Sterling, a name that vaguely sounded familiar, perhaps from the high-end real estate world in Los Angeles. Something I'd read in the newspaper somewhere, but I couldn't understand why it would appear here in the hand of this seemingly eccentric neighbor. It left me bewildered, I bent down and picked up the money clip. Right next to it, at the base of the gate, I found a small piece of paper caught in the crack. It looked like part of an old bill or a notice, blown there by the wind and stuck. I picked it up, my eyes squinting to read the faded lettering. Andrew's name was printed on it, unmistakable, but the payment or beneficiary account was Sterling Capital Holdings, LLC. An unfamiliar name, yet it had Sterling in it, just like on Thompson's money clip. I stood frozen, the paper in my hand. The vague sense of unease now felt heavier, but there was still so much I didn't understand. A nest of vipers? Thompson seemed eccentric, but his words and actions, coupled with the details I'd just picked up, swirled in my head. Perhaps it was just a coincidence. Or maybe this neighbor had an overly vivid imagination. Still, I couldn't completely dismiss this apprehension. Andrew was my son. I came here to see him, to reconcile. Things might not be as I thought, but what had just happened had planted an unsettling seed of doubt. I took a deep breath, trying to push away the jumbled thoughts. I pressed the doorbell. The chime echoed, sounding out of place in the quiet of the affluent neighborhood. Immediately, a red light on the security camera above the gate blinked, like an emotionless eye watching me. I straightened up, ready to face whatever awaited inside, though my heart was still filled with unanswered questions. The doorbell I'd just pressed still resonated in the quiet neighborhood, and the red light on the security camera above the gate continued to blink, like an emotionless eye scrutinizing me. I stood there, still holding the piece of paper with Sterling Capital Holdings, LLC, my mind filled with bewilderment. But I quickly dismissed the feeling. Mr. Thompson had a reputation for being eccentric and exaggerating. Perhaps his nest of vipers warning was just his imagination, and those company names were merely a random coincidence. Just then, an engine roared from the end of the road. A luxurious black SUV sped up, stopping right behind my old Cadillac. Andrew stepped out of the driver's seat. My son, dressed in a sharp suit, flashed a radiant smile. "Dad, I'm sorry to keep you waiting. Something urgent just came up," he said, his voice trying to sound as natural as possible. Andrew quickly walked over and hugged me. The hug felt somewhat forced, not as warm as I had hoped. Moreover, the unfamiliar, strong scent of cologne on Andrew made me slightly uncomfortable, an unfamiliar scent that didn't belong to my son. Right after Andrew, Clara, my daughter-in-law, also stepped out from the passenger seat. She wore an elegant ivory satin dress, holding a box of pastries from a fancy bakery. Clara smiled gently, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Dad, you arrived so unexpectedly. We didn't have time to prepare a proper welcome," she said, her voice also sounding a bit apologetic, which made me briefly wonder, unexpected? I had announced my visit a week ago, but never mind, I told myself. Perhaps they were too busy with work, or simply my memory wasn't as good anymore. I didn't want to make things difficult for them. They opened the gate and invited me inside. I stepped across the threshold. An immediate sense of unfamiliarity enveloped me. The mansion was overwhelmingly luxurious, yet it lacked any warmth of a family home. Glossy leather sofas, cool marble floors, a glass coffee table so shiny it reflected the clouds in the sky. Everything was perfectly cold, more like a show home than a cozy abode. My eyes inadvertently landed on a half-wiped smudge, faint on the glass coffee table, a small imperfection in this nearly perfect space, like a sign of haste or oversight. On a shelf near the entrance, my eyes were drawn to a real estate folder loosely tucked into a plastic sleeve. I managed to glimpse bold print, like transfer of usage rights or property purchase agreement. Andrew seemed to notice where my gaze was directed. He quickly closed the folder and neatly placed it in a small drawer nearby. Andrew chuckled. "Ah, just some trivial business matters, Dad. Nothing at all. You don't need to worry about it." His hurried concealment made me a little puzzled, but I reassured myself again. Perhaps Andrew didn't want me, an old man, to interfere in his complex business affairs. Maybe he just wanted to keep things simple and less worrisome for me. Andrew had always been secretive about his business. Clara placed the pastry box on the table. She took out a tray with 3 crystal glasses already arranged. She began setting them on the dining table, her movements natural and unremarkable. Andrew pulled out a chair for me. "Tonight, we'll have a very special dinner to celebrate your arrival," he said, trying to create a cheerful atmosphere. I sat on the leather sofa, my eyes inadvertently sweeping over the gleaming glass tabletop. In that moment, I saw Andrew and Clara reflected in the distance. They had just exchanged a quick, fleeting glance. Perhaps it was just a normal exchange of glances between a married couple before starting a meal. But somehow, a slightly uneasy, vague feeling still arose within me, a sense that the atmosphere here wasn't entirely comfortable. I thought perhaps it was just because we hadn't seen each other in a long time, and all three of us were a bit awkward. Everything could be explained, right? I tried to push those strange feelings out of my mind. If your children act enthusiastic but a bit forced, do you trust their sincerity? I tried to shake off the vague feelings that were creeping in. Anyway, I was here now, in this unfamiliar mansion. Andrew and Clara sat opposite me at the opulent dining table that I had a feeling was rarely used. Both of them tried to create an intimate atmosphere, but everything felt a bit overdone. Andrew began asking about my health, about life in the suburbs. "Are you still well, Dad?" "We haven't seen each other in years, but you're still as sharp as ever," Andrew said, his voice seemingly enthusiastic, but I still sensed a certain awkwardness, as if he were trying to play a role. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes sweeping around the room, not truly focused on the conversation. "I heard you've been spending a lot of time in the garden lately, haven't you? Is our garden still beautiful, Dad? I remember how you used to boast about your rose bushes." "Oh, I'm still the same, Andrew," I replied, trying to smile, still puttering around with my roses. "The garden, without Eleanor to tend it, it's much emptier." My heart sank a little when I mentioned Eleanor. A brief silence fell. Andrew nodded slightly, but I saw no sympathy in his eyes. Perhaps it was due to the long separation that our affection had cooled, I told myself, trying to find a plausible reason for this distance. I didn't want to blame my son, not right now. I took the family photo frame out of my gift bag, carefully placing it on the table, between the three of us. In the photo, Eleanor was smiling brightly, holding Andrew when he was a little boy. "Your mother always hoped our family would be reunited," I said, my voice softening slightly, wanting to remind Andrew of the true value of family, of Eleanor's unconditional love, hoping that the image of her smile would melt some of the coldness that enveloped us. Andrew looked at the photo, his smile stiffening slightly for a fleeting second before returning to normal. Clara merely glanced at it before turning away, adjusting her dress. Clara smiled, a smile so sweet that I found it a little unsettling, as it seemed too perfect, as if rehearsed. "That's right. I'll cook something special for you tonight, Dad." "Your favorite dessert from back then?" "Baked apple pie, right?" Her voice was bright, sounding caring. "Baked apple pie?" I was momentarily surprised. "Ah, yes. Eleanor used to make that often." I didn't recall Clara ever asking me about that preference, or even knowing about it. That made me slightly wonder. Perhaps Andrew had told his wife, and she wanted to please me, I reassured myself again. But a subtle, vague feeling of incongruity still crept into my mind. The way she spoke, everything was so perfect it felt alien. The atmosphere in the room, instead of warming up, felt a little heavy, indescribable. I sensed the awkwardness in their words and smiles, but I still tried to believe that it was just because we hadn't reconnected yet. While we were talking, from the kitchen came the clinking of the dishwasher, the sound of water draining, then an abrupt stop. I distinctly heard the machine door creak open. Immediately I looked towards the kitchen. Through the doorway I glimpsed Clara standing there, holding a freshly washed crystal glass. It was the very glass I had seen her meticulously wiping earlier. She held the glass up to the light, inspecting every angle, every surface, as if searching for an invisible stain or something else. Then she set that particular glass aside, on a small tray, with even greater care than she had arranged the others. That meticulous action, combined with the cold exchange glance between the couple, sent a shiver down my spine. This meticulousness, I suspected, wasn't because she wanted me to have the cleanest glass. It carried another meaning, a much more sinister one, something directly related to Mr. Thompson's warning. I always felt something was off, but could my intuition be wrong? Clara's unusually meticulous attention to the crystal glass, coupled with the forced words and smiles of both Andrew and Clara, planted a fragile seed of doubt in my heart. Though I tried to reassure myself, the coldness and distance in this house continued to bother me. I felt a need to investigate further, not to accuse, but to dispel the unsettling premonitions that surrounded me. Andrew was sitting opposite me, glued to his phone. It seemed he was in a tense conversation, or dealing with some important matter. He kept swiping the screen, his fingers typing quickly, his face showing a fleeting look of worry without noticing me. This was my chance. I turned around, pretending to reach for an architecture magazine on a nearby side table. As I bent down, my eyes inadvertently swept across the drawer where Andrew had hastily put away the real estate folder when I first arrived. "Just trivial business matters, Dad," he had said. But was it really trivial? An indescribable urge made me want to know for sure. Not to investigate rigorously, but just to soothe the unease in my heart, or to confirm that I was wrong, that Andrew was still my son, not someone plotting something. I subtly reached out, gently pulling the drawer open a little, just enough to retrieve the folder. My heart pounded in my chest, beating faster than usual, like a drumming in my head. I opened the folder, trying to maintain a calm facade as if reading a magazine, though my eyes were focused only on the words on the paper. Inside, I saw a document with a large, bold title, Asset Management Power of Attorney Agreement. Below grantor was Andrew's signature, and the grantee was Clara Hayes. An asset management power of attorney agreement? It sounded legal, but why was it necessary to that extent, and why hide it from me? I thought to myself perhaps this was a normal procedure in Andrew's business circles, but I couldn't help but wonder. The discomfort began to grow. It was no longer just vague. I turned a few more pages, and the knot in my stomach tightened further. A cold sensation began to spread from my spine. Tucked inside were several documents directly related to my suburban home. There was a section specifically underlined about Mr. Edward Grant's right to dispose of assets after death. Other documents talked about debts secured by the property at this address. My entire house, my life savings with Eleanor, where we had built so many memories, was neatly contained in this folder, under a shadowy power of attorney agreement and mounting debts. I froze. The blood in my veins seemed to congeal. Eleanor. Her name stood out clearly in my mind. I remembered the days when she was alive. We had put so much effort into building that house together. Every brick, every potted plant bearing the imprint of our love. Someday, this house will be a home for Andrew and the grandchildren, Eleanor used to say, her eyes filled with hope. I had always believed it was a precious asset, a legacy of love, not something to be bargained with or exploited. Now, everything was shattered. A feeling of betrayal surged, burning hot in my chest as if on fire. Andrew, my son, had deceived me. And with Clara, they were conspiring to seize my property. All the love, all the expectations, now crumbled like broken glass, beyond repair. They weren't normal. They had a plan. Andrew seemed to sense the change in atmosphere. He turned back, saw me holding the folder, and his eyes clearly showed surprise. The forced smile reappeared on his lips, but quickly vanished, replaced by a look of displeasure. He snatched the folder from my hand in a flash. "Don't worry, Dad, it's just trivial financial procedures. I'm planning to renovate your old house." His voice tried to be reassuring, but I clearly saw the panic and anger hidden beneath every word. His eyes were wary, as if warning me not to interfere. I looked directly at Andrew, my voice low, trying to keep it from trembling with the disappointment and disgust that churned within me. "What are you planning to do with my old house?" I saw documents related to inheritance rights and mortgage debts. Andrew cut me off, his voice suddenly sharp, losing all pretense of intimacy, revealing his true nature. "Don't meddle in my affairs, Dad. That's my and Clara's private business." He shoved the folder violently into the drawer, his face grim, turning his back on me as if the conversation was over. His anger was clear, like a mask ripped off, confirming everything I had just read. They were not normal at all. Just then, Clara emerged from the kitchen. She held a clean apron in her hand, and a familiar smile bloomed on her face, as if she had just witnessed something amusing. And then, she began to hum an old melody. It was the lullaby Eleanor used to sing to Andrew when he was little, a song full of love and tenderness. She often sang it when Andrew had a fever, or when he was afraid of the dark. Eleanor always hummed that song with sparkling eyes and a warm smile. That humming, instead of bringing some comfort, pierced my heart with agonizing pain, a disgust I had never felt before. It was no longer a cherished melody, but a blatant invasion of my most private and sacred memories. Clara was trying to manipulate me, trying to seize even the most beautiful memories of my family, as if she wanted to erase Eleanor's traces, to replace her in my mind. I felt disgusted, a cold sensation running through my body. All my suspicions were confirmed. I wasn't just in a financial trap, it was an emotional one. Andrew and Clara, they were completely abnormal. They were dangerous. Eleanor's lullaby, hummed by Clara in a counterfeit way, echoed in my ears, digging deep into my wounded heart. Andrew sat opposite me, his face grim. Everything was now too clear. The folder about the old house, Andrew's sharp words, and that humming all were like knives twisting into every memory. I tried to breathe deeply, but my chest still felt constricted. I needed a private moment to compose myself, to sort through the chaotic thoughts in my head. "I'll just get a glass of cold water," I offered as an excuse, standing up and quickly walking into the kitchen. My steps tried to appear normal, but my heart was pounding, as if wanting to leap out of my chest. Once in the kitchen, the space was large and bright, yet it felt cold and uninhabited. I opened the cabinet under the sink, trying to find a water pitcher or a clean glass. I reached my hand between bottles of dish soap and regular cleaning solutions. No water pitcher, but my hand brushed against a white plastic bottle, without a clear label. My eyes narrowed. On the side of the bottle, a secondary label was almost completely peeled off, only faintly showing a few words. Highly corrosive, do not ingest, and a faded red skull and crossbones warning symbol. This bottle didn't look like any household cleaning product I'd ever seen. It seemed industrial, dangerous. My heart nearly stopped. A chilling sensation ran down my spine, not from the coldness of the cabinet, but from the rising horror. A bottle of poison mixed in here? I remembered Mr. Thompson's warning. That warning now was no longer the words of an eccentric. My hands trembled as I put the bottle back, trying not to make any noise, trying to appear calm as if I hadn't seen anything, hadn't made any terrifying discovery. I told myself I had to be very careful not to reveal my panic. Meanwhile, images of young Andrew and Eleanor flashed in my mind. Andrew, as a child, was a bright, intelligent boy. He used to hug me, his eyes sparkling as he talked about his dream of becoming an architect. "I'll build beautiful houses for you and Mom," he once said. We had happy, simple years. When did the conflict between Andrew and me begin? Perhaps when he ventured into big business deals, when he started to drift away from the values Eleanor and I had instilled in him. We once had a fiery argument about him dropping out of college to pursue some $1 million project. I wanted him to live a stable life, but he always yearned for money and fame. And then Clara appeared, a sharp, ambitious woman who seemed to push Andrew even further away from me. Over the past 3 years, calls became less frequent. Meetings were only quick pleasantries, without the bond of father and son. I had tried to believe that Andrew was still my son, that he was just busy, but now, the image of that dangerous liquid bottle, along with everything else, painted a cruel truth. In the gleaming oven door, I saw Clara's reflection standing right behind me, a thin smile on her face. Her voice rang out, startling me slightly, but she quickly masked her surprise. "Are you all right, Dad? Do you need me to get you some water?" I knew she had been watching me. She was controlling my every move. I awkwardly poured myself a glass of cold water, deliberately staying away from the sink area. I carried the water to the dining room, but my eyes never left Clara. She was holding the crystal glass I had seen her meticulously wiping earlier. I saw her open a small unlabeled vial, perhaps an old eye drop bottle or an essential oil bottle, and discreetly drop a few clear drops of liquid into that glass. The movement was very quick and subtle, just enough for me to catch a glimpse. I placed my glass of plain water on the table. The dark brown stain on the tablecloth, which I had noticed before, now stood out even more clearly under the lights, like a gruesome reminder of some incident that had once occurred here. I swallowed hard, clutching my glass of water tightly in my hand. Fear and anger surged within me. Andrew and Clara, my son and daughter-in-law, they were plotting to harm me. I can't let them manipulate me, I told myself, my voice a whisper in my mind, a cold determination replacing my initial panic. Now, I was no longer a weak, lonely father visiting his son. I was a 72-year-old man fighting to protect his own life. I swallowed hard, clutching my glass of plain water tightly in my hand. Fear and anger surged within me. Andrew and Clara, my son and daughter-in-law, they were plotting to harm me. I can't let them manipulate me, I told myself, my voice a whisper in my mind, a cold determination replacing my initial panic. Now, I was no longer a weak, lonely father visiting his son. I was a 72-year-old man fighting to protect his own life. I returned to the dining table, trying to maintain the calmest expression possible. Andrew looked at me, his eyes scrutinizing. I pretended to set my glass of water down, exhaling a slight sigh of relief as if I had just escaped some discomfort in the kitchen. Immediately after, Clara emerged from the kitchen, carrying a small tray. On the tray was a bottle of red wine and 3 sparkling crystal glasses. Her smile was still bright, but I could clearly see her eyes were cold and calculating. She placed the tray on the table. I immediately recognized the crystal glass I had seen her meticulously wiping earlier, and into which she had then dropped a few clear drops of liquid. She skillfully placed it closest to my seat. Clara picked up the wine bottle and poured red wine into all 3 glasses. Andrew, trying to appear enthusiastic, gently pushed the special glass towards me. "Dad, try this. I saved this wine for a special occasion. It's been years since our family reunited." He looked directly at me, his eyes filled with expectation, and I distinctly felt the pressure weighing down on me. I lightly touched the glass, feeling a chill from the crystal. I deliberately cleared my throat, prolonging the moment, then said, my voice sounding tired but firm, "Thank you, son, but the doctor told me to limit alcohol. Besides, I'm on new medication, so I shouldn't drink. You two go ahead." I tried to make my refusal sound as natural as possible, like an old man's health reason. Clara wasn't easily deterred. She smiled sweetly, but her voice was a little forced, hinting at displeasure. "Just a sip, Dad. To celebrate our family reunion. It's been so long since we had this occasion." She even intentionally pushed the wine glass closer to me, her eyes somewhat urging. Andrew sat silently. I saw him glance at Clara, a look that was both hesitant and somewhat wavering. It was as if he wanted to stop, wanted to find a way out of this situation. I remembered Andrew from before, stubborn but never heartless. Had Clara forced him? Was he also trapped in this mess? A tiny spark of hope flickered within me, that Andrew still had some conscience left. But then his eyes quickly shifted back to me, mixing confusion with a cold determination, as if he had convinced himself to continue. That look vanished quickly, replaced by his usual hardened expression. I looked down at the table. The dark brown stain on the tablecloth, which I had noticed before, now stood out even more clearly under the lights, like a gruesome reminder of some incident that had once occurred at this very table, possibly also involving some special drink. I made my decision. "I'll just stick to water, thank you, son. It's a habit now. Besides, I'm not used to strong alcohol anymore." I put the wine glass down, replacing it with the plain water I had brought from the kitchen. The atmosphere at the dining table suddenly became deadly silent, heavy and suffocating. The smiles on Andrew and Clara's faces stiffened like wax figures. Andrew clenched his fist under the table, his eyes darting uncomfortably at Clara, as if blaming her for putting him in this situation, but then quickly concealing it. I clearly felt their unspoken disappointment and anger. Their eyes looked at me, no longer hiding their coldness and malice. I knew I had just refused an inappropriate invitation to drink, but the battle, I knew, had only just begun. I placed my glass of plain water on the table, facing Andrew and Clara's strained silence. Their smiles stiffened like wax figures, and their cold eyes fixed on me. I knew I had just refused an inappropriate invitation to drink, but the battle, I knew, had only just begun. Andrew broke the silence. He frowned, his voice completely changed, no longer maintaining the initial false intimacy. "Dad, don't you trust us? It's just a celebratory drink." Andrew looked directly at me, his eyes full of scrutiny and impatience. I clearly felt the anger bubbling within him like a fire about to erupt. Clara didn't let Andrew say much. She quickly replaced the wine glass with a glass of bright red juice, placing it directly in front of me. "If you don't drink wine, Dad, have this. Apple and pomegranate juice, very good for your health." I made it myself. Her voice was still sweet, but I sensed a terrifying stubbornness. Like a patient predator, when one plan failed, they would move to another. I knew this juice, with its vibrant color hiding something, was no different from the wine glass earlier. I gave a forced smile and stood up from the table. I needed to get out of here immediately, even if only for a few short minutes. I'll just go wash my hands. I also need to use the restroom, I said, trying to make my voice sound as natural as possible. I needed time and private space, at least somewhere with a lock on the door, to act. I quickly walked into the bathroom, locking the door immediately. My back pressed against the door, my heart pounding in my chest, beating so loudly I could almost hear it. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, my hands trembling as I found the number for Mr. Peterson, my longtime and trusted lawyer. Hello? Mr. Peterson. It's Edward Grant. My voice trembled slightly, but I tried to speak as clearly and soberly as possible. I'm at Andrew's house. I think I'm in big trouble. There are suspicious signs. I need advice immediately, and perhaps even police intervention. I'm concerned for my safety. I spoke quickly, briefly explaining the suspicious chemical bottle I saw in the kitchen, the crystal glass Clara had meticulously prepared and dropped something into, and Andrew and Clara's coercive attitude. Mr. Peterson was a sharp, experienced man. I knew he would understand the seriousness of the situation. He was capable enough to assess and know how to act. Are you all right, Dad? Come out, the food's getting cold. Andrew's voice came from outside the door, accompanied by loud, impatient, and slightly angry knocks. He made no attempt to hide his impatience. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm. I'll be right out. I ended the call, slipping the phone into my pocket. Opening the door, I had to face them. I knew I had to pretend to be normal, to continue playing the role of an old, oblivious father until help arrived. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm. I'll be right out. I ended the call, slipped my phone into my pocket, and then opened the door. Andrew and Clara stood right outside, their faces full of scrutiny and displeasure. I knew I had to pretend to be normal, to continue playing the role of an old, oblivious father until help arrived. All three of us returned to the dining table. The atmosphere was now as heavy as a stone. Every passing second felt endless. I pretended to eat a few small bites, but my throat was still dry. Each piece of food felt stuck. The glass of bright red juice remained untouched in front of me. I rested my hand lightly on it, but resolutely did not touch my lips to it. Clara kept pressing me, her sweet, fake smile. Drink up, Dad, it's getting cold. It's good for your heart. Her eyes never left me for a second. I looked at the juice glass, then at Andrew. He sat there, his eyes burning into me, full of impatience. I clearly felt the anger boiling inside him, like a fire about to erupt if I continued to refuse. The two of them, like two hawks circling their prey. I knew I couldn't refuse forever. The pressure was so intense I could almost suffocate. My hand, trembling almost imperceptibly, slowly picked up the juice glass. I brought the glass close to my lips, my eyes meeting Andrew and Clara's expectant gazes. In that moment, everything around me seemed to stop. My mind drifted into a sudden flood of memories. I remembered Andrew when he was a little boy. One rainy afternoon, I spoon-fed him small amounts of porridge when he had a fever. "Open wide, son," I'd said, and he'd obediently swallowed, his dark eyes looking at me with trust. I remembered the times he fell off his bike. I'd pick him up, comfort him, bandage his wounds. The boundless love of a father, I had given it all to him. And now this very boy, along with the woman sitting beside him, wanted me to drink this? Is this the end of our father-son bond? I spoon-fed him milk, rice, medicine, and now he wants me to drink this? A heart-wrenching question echoed in my head. I felt so helpless, weak, trapped in the snare my own son had set. The pain of betrayal was greater than the fear of death. The glass lightly touched my lips. I closed my eyes, thinking of Eleanor. This time, do I really have to go, Eleanor? Just then, a sudden, rapid sound pierced the extreme tension in the room. Ring, 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 ring! The doorbell rang continuously, urgently. Immediately after, there were loud, firm knocks, as if trying to break down the door. "Los Angeles Police! We're here for a welfare check. Open up!" A clear, authoritative voice rang out from outside. Andrew and Clara instantly turned pale. All pretense of calm vanished, replaced by extreme panic. Andrew stood frozen, his eyes wide. Clara stood stunned, the box of pastries in her hand falling to the floor with a dry thud. They didn't expect the police to arrive so quickly. A sudden, intense wave of relief washed over my body, as if I had just escaped an abyss. I still tried to maintain a calm expression, not revealing my emotions, but inwardly, I was breathing a sigh of relief I had never known. The door opened. 2 police officers stepped in, their eyes quickly scanning the room, from us to the dining table, then stopping at the tense faces of Andrew and Clara, and the glass of bright red juice resting lightly against my lips. I knew Mr. Peterson had acted very quickly and effectively. I placed the glass down on the table, taking a step back, my gaze sweeping over Andrew and Clara, who were pale at the unexpected arrival of the police. I had been saved in the nick of time. The 2 police officers began to take statements. I recounted everything clearly, from Andrew's invitation call, the suspicious details in the house, the chemical bottle in the kitchen, to the specially prepared crystal glass, and the juice Clara tried to force me to drink. I didn't omit a single detail, trying to keep my voice calm, although my heart was still filled with the exhaustion and pain of a father betrayed by his children. Andrew and Clara remained rooted to the spot, their eyes panicked. As I pointed out the evidence, an officer approached Clara, who was trying to hide the fallen pastry box on the floor. "What's going on, officers?" Clara suddenly spoke up, her voice a little shrill, mixed with a slight startle, but quickly regaining her composure, even with a hint of accusation. "Why are you here?" "We're just having a family dinner," she said, trying to create an impression of a normal family scene being disrupted. The officer looked at her, then at me. "Sir, we received a report regarding your safety." Hearing this, Clara immediately spun around to me, her eyes full of confusion and even a hint of reproach. "Dad, what's wrong with you? What are you saying? Suddenly calling the police. Is something wrong with you?" She tried to appear worried, but I clearly saw the manipulation in that question, as if trying to make me out to be the instigator. Andrew, his face still pale, sweat beading on his forehead, and his hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles were white. He forced a smile, but it was twisted. Dad is just..." Maybe he misunderstood, Clara. I looked at Andrew, then at Clara. Now, I had no doubt. They were trying to cover up the truth. I did not waver, my voice remaining calm. "Officers," I said, ignoring Clara's excuses. "The white plastic bottle under the sink that I saw in the kitchen, it has a warning symbol, highly corrosive, do not ingest. And this crystal glass on the table, along with this juice, I believe something has been put in it," Clara immediately retorted, her voice rising, somewhat sharp. "No way! That bottle is just a common strong cleaner that I bought to clean the house. I had no idea it was that dangerous. And these glasses, aren't all glasses alike? My dad is probably just a little too suspicious. He's old now, so his memory isn't as good as it used to be." She deliberately emphasized my age and confusion. Andrew quickly interjected, his voice slightly shaky but still trying to appear calm, cooperating with Clara. "Yes, that's right, officers. My dad, he's a bit old, and his memory doesn't seem to be as good as it used to be. He tends to worry excessively, sometimes even imagines things that aren't real." Andrew looked at me with an apologetic gaze, as if pleading with me not to make things difficult for them, but deep down, I saw his desperation and a determination to get rid of me. "We are very willing to cooperate with you to clarify everything. I'm sure this is just a big misunderstanding." The police officers, with professional demeanor, began to act. One started taking preliminary statements, the other carefully photographed the evidence. They confiscated the suspicious chemical bottle, along with the juice glass and the wine glass, to send for forensic testing. "We will need the full cooperation of both of you at the station," one officer said to Andrew and Clara, his voice calm but firm. "And Mr. Edward, we will ensure your safety." Anger flared within me when I heard Andrew and Clara deliberately distorting the truth, turning me into a senile old man. But with it came an immeasurable sense of relief. I was not alone. The battle wasn't over, but at least I had allies. And I knew I had been saved in the nick of time. I placed the glass down on the table, taking a step back, my gaze sweeping over Andrew and Clara, who were pale at the unexpected arrival of the police. I had been saved in the nick of time. The 2 police officers began to take statements. I recounted everything clearly, from Andrew's invitation call, the suspicious details in the house, the chemical bottle in the kitchen, to the specially prepared crystal glass, and the juice Clara tried to force me to drink. I didn't omit a single detail, trying to keep my voice calm, although my heart was still filled with the exhaustion and pain of a father betrayed by his children. Andrew and Clara, sitting opposite the police officer, continued to brazenly deny all accusations. "My dad is just imagining things," Andrew said, his voice slightly shaky but still trying to appear calm. "He's old now, sometimes his mind isn't as clear." Clara chimed in, her face showing feigned worry. "Yes, my dad sometimes hallucinates. Every house has cleaning bottles, and all glasses look alike." Their words were like knives twisting further into my emotional wound, trying to portray me as a confused old man, untrustworthy. Anger flared within me, but I tried to restrain it, knowing that the truth would soon be revealed. Another officer was checking Andrew's phone. I don't know how he managed to access it, but Andrew seemed too panicked to resist. The officer scrolled through the screen, then suddenly stopped. He stared at the phone, then looked up, his eyes scrutinizing Andrew. "We see Thompson's name appearing frequently in messages related to land transactions and loan documents for this couple," the officer said unexpectedly, his voice devoid of emotion. "It seems to be related to the mortgage on Mr. Edward Grant's house?" I was stunned. My entire body felt frozen. Mr. Thompson? The neighbor who warned me about the nest of vipers and those papers? It turned out he wasn't just a casual passerby or an eccentric. He was intimately involved in Andrew and Clara's shady financial dealings and debts. All the disparate pieces suddenly clicked together in my mind, forming a complete but repulsive picture. I remembered the metallic money clip with the Sterling Realty Group logo on its gleaming surface that I had glimpsed when Mr. Thompson turned away, and the name Sterling Capital Holdings LLC on the piece of bill I picked up at the base of the gate. Sterling it all connected. Thompson wasn't just a warning, he was a cunning fox, an opportunist, specializing in waiting on the sidelines for other people's families to crumble so he could profit. That warning, instead of being selfless help, was a sophisticated ploy to create chaos, pushing me into doubting my children. He wanted Andrew and me to be irreconcilably conflicted, so that he could then easily take over Andrew's house, which I was helping to mortgage, or even my old house that they were conspiring to seize. He didn't just want money. He wanted everything to fall apart so he could pick up the pieces. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, not just from the ultimate betrayal by my children, but also from the insidious, cruel nature of this third party. Andrew and Clara, blinded by greed, had turned themselves into tools for someone else. Anger surged within me, mixed with disgust. I not only had to fight my own children, but also another cold opportunist lurking in the shadows. The revealed truth brought no peace, only thickened this gloomy veil. Andrew and Clara were taken to the police station for further questioning, while I was taken to a nearby hotel. I waited, my heart weary, yet hopeful. Hope that eventually justice would be served, and I would be free from this nightmare. I had contacted Mr. Peterson, my lawyer, and he reassured me that with the evidence found, Andrew and Clara would have a hard time escaping conviction. However, a few days later, news came to me like another knife stab to the heart. Mr. Peterson came to see me, his face heavy. "Edward, I'm very sorry to tell you. The case is turning unfavorable." He explained that the chemical samples from the bottle under the sink were contaminated, making it impossible to draw a definitive conclusion. As for the crystal glass, it was claimed to be just one of many similar glasses, nothing special. Andrew and Clara, with the help of Clara's brother, a high-ranking official in the state investigation team, quickly turned the tide. They created a fake medical record describing me as an elderly man, forgetful, sometimes showing signs of delusion and confusion. Andrew and Clara are devoted children, always trying to care for their elderly father, but he often imagines things that aren't real, they testified. Messages about Sterling Capital Holdings LLC and Thompson were spun as complex business transactions that a mentally unclear old man like me couldn't possibly understand. They even hinted that I might have placed the chemical bottle there myself, and deliberately caused trouble to attract attention. I was stunned, unable to believe my ears. The evidence was so clear, my testimony so coherent, yet it was twisted into the words of a senile old man. Anger and disgust surged within me, but with it came an overwhelming sense of helplessness. I realized that not only were Andrew and Clara greedy, but they also had shady connections, strong enough to bend justice. Mr. Peterson had done his best, but against a corrupted system, he could only shake his head in despair. "Edward, I cannot force you to stay here. I'm afraid that if you continue to confront them, they might try to harm you again, and this time it will be more subtle, leaving no trace." Mr. Peterson's words slammed every door shut. I understood that, to them, I was no longer a father to be cared for, but an obstacle to be removed. I had no other choice. I couldn't go back to the old house, which held too many memories and was now also the target of their greed. I also couldn't stay in Beverly Hills, where those people were lurking. After the case was closed, with the conclusion that I had misunderstood and imagined things, I made a decision. I sold the old house in the suburbs, the only asset Andrew and Clara coveted, and used the money to rent a small, cozy house in a distant, peaceful town. A place where no one knew me, where there were no ghosts of the past, no calculating eyes. I planted trees, read books, and enjoyed my old age in solitude, trying to heal a wound that would never fully mend. A few years later, one morning, while sipping my favorite herbal tea, I read a small article in the local newspaper. Andrew and Clara had been arrested, not for conspiring to harm me, but for another large-scale financial fraud, falsifying documents, and seizing the assets of another investor who happened to be Clara's brother, the one who had helped her twist my case. The very connections and schemes they used to harm me ultimately turned back to bite them. The investigation uncovered a complex web of debts and illicit real estate transactions, including the involvement of Sterling Capital Holdings LLC and Mr. Thompson. Edward held the newspaper in his hands, his eyes following slowly along each line, each photograph printed in that cold black ink. The morning's main headline was not about politics or a financial scandal, but about the very people who once bore his family name, Andrew and Clara. Right on the front page, the photo taken at the courthouse struck him silent. His son and the daughter-in-law he had once tried so hard to trust, now standing with bowed heads, wrists locked in steel cuffs under the press cameras. The image pierced him like a blade, shredding what little illusions of kinship he had left. And behind them, he could see Mr. Thompson, arms folded, lips curved into a thin smirk. The meaning of that smirk was unmistakable. It was not satisfaction that justice had been served, but triumph that his long-planned goal was finally achieved. Andrew and Clara's downfall had cleared the path for him to seize what he wanted. Edward exhaled, set the paper down on the wooden table, and poured himself another cup of hot tea. Steam drifted upward, curling into the pale light slipping in through the window, filling the quiet room with an even deeper stillness. He took a slow sip. The taste was bitter, with a faint trace of sweetness, just like life itself at this moment. He had lost so much family affection, trust, the peace an old man ought to enjoy in his final years. Yet at least he still held on to what mattered most, his safety, and the remnants of his dignity. "Good thing I got out in time," he whispered. The words were part reminder, part affirmation, meant to silence the last traces of doubt. Had he lingered any longer, he might have been dragged down with them, used, discarded, and perhaps even branded as a senile old fool complicit in their lies. The memory remained vivid. Andrew and Clara, desperately justifying themselves before the police. Andrew's voice trembled with rage as he insisted his father was confused, that age had blurred Edward's mind. Clara, sharper, tried to spin the narrative with polished words, painting the whole affair as one big misunderstanding. For a moment, fury had flared inside Edward, but with it came a strange, overwhelming relief because the truth had finally broken through their fabrications. He would never forget the moment two officers stepped forward, resting firm hands on Andrew's shoulder, the metallic click of handcuffs echoing as they snapped shut. Clara shrieked, struggled, but was pinned down all the same. The sound of their footsteps, heavy, dragging against the courthouse floor, reverberated in his chest long after they were gone. Then came the silence. The once luxurious mansion, full of glitter and pretense, suddenly felt hollow, colder than stone. Edward stood alone in the grand living room, eyes drifting across the portraits and ornaments Clara had once displayed with pride. None of it meant anything now. All that wealth had been bought with deceit and betrayal. What he had narrowly escaped was not just a house, but a prison of the soul, a place where he had nearly lost his faith in humanity and in himself. Outside, the wind stirred the garden, scattering dried leaves across the path with a whispering sound. Edward closed his eyes, letting that whisper settle deep inside him. The road ahead would still be lonely, yes, but it was his road, free of their chains. In his sorrow, he found a strange kind of peace. In his bitterness, a quiet liberation. And that, he knew, was a victory no one could ever take away. My story, Edward Grant's, is perhaps a reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers come from those closest to us, from the places we least expect in my case, from my son and daughter-in-law. It also shows that, in life, not everything is always as clear as we expect. Sometimes the truth is hidden beneath a perfect facade of wealth, of forced smiles and sweet but hollow words. And sometimes warnings, even from a stranger, an eccentric like Mr. Thompson, carry a deeper meaning than we might imagine. The Sterling Realty Group money clip on Thompson's clip, the bill with Sterling Capital Holdings LLC, those small clues. If I hadn't paid attention, if I hadn't trusted my intuition from Andrew's evasiveness or Clara's excessive meticulousness with the glass, perhaps everything would have turned out differently. The biggest lesson I learned is to always trust your gut. That vague sense of unease from the beginning of the trip, the small imperfections, the fleeting, suggestive glances, they are all signals our body and mind send us. Never dismiss them, especially when it comes to important issues like your health, your assets, or your personal safety. And most importantly, always have a plan B, a trusted friend or lawyer you can contact when you're in trouble, just as Mr. Peterson helped me. Actively seeking help is key to escaping dangerous situations. My story may have had a rather fortunate ending, but not everyone is so lucky. Perhaps many of you watching this story have experienced similar feelings, concerns about family, assets, or those around you. Life in old age is sometimes not easy, and we need to protect ourselves. Through this story, we want to send a small message to our dear viewers. Always be cautious, trust your instincts, and never let anyone make you feel that your worries are unfounded or senile. Your health, safety, and peace of mind are the most important things. If anything makes you uneasy, seek help from trusted individuals. We always care and wish you a life of peace, independence, and that you never have to face any nests of vipers in your life.